Hello and welcome to another episode of Busy Brains Hub, the podcast. This week, as the episode title says, we're talking about overthinking, and some other things to do with busy brains and how we think. So I was thinking about my episode from last week, and I mentioned towards the end that I wanted to talk a little bit about how much I've overthought my appointment. But I want to go beyond that. I don't want to just be talking about this upcoming psychiatry appointment. There's a lot more to my life than that, as I'm sure there is to yours. So maybe to start with, let's just talk about some of the different ways that we can end up falling into sort of overthinking patterns. And I wrote them down so I didn't forget. And like I said last week, I will try not to ramble too much. So the first type of overthinking that a lot of us are probably familiar with is something called rumination. So rumination is essentially where we are sort of going over and over and over negative experiences or sort of past memories that were not great, like past mistakes, things like that, right? Have I got that right? Yeah, past mistakes. So we just keep replaying it over and over in our head and sort of like, I can't believe I did that. Why did I do that? Did I do that? What happened with that? The other type of overthinking that a lot of us are probably familiar with is catastrophizing. So this is where we can end up kind of thinking that the worst thing is going to happen. So something that hasn't happened yet, we're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe this has happened. And therefore this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. And everything's going to fall apart and it's going to be horrible. Something I'm very familiar with. Unfortunately. And the third type that a lot of us are probably familiar with is analysis paralysis. So this is where we can end up overthinking a decision so much that we kind of don't do anything. Very common in ADHD, and actually from my understanding, when we talk about ADHD paralysis, a lot of what we're talking about is analysis paralysis. So it's where we can kind of go, okay, I've got to get up. You might have seen this TikTok video. There's been a few people doing it based on this sort of trending sound. And it was like, I've got to get out of bed and then I've got to make a coffee. But before I have a coffee, I'm going to go to the gym. But if I'm going to go to the gym, I should probably have, I shouldn't have a shower yet. You know, like I'm not saying in the right order, but you get what I mean? Kind of like, okay. And then you kind of just end up doing nothing. For me, a lot of the time what can happen as well is I can't work out how all the things are going to fit in the day. So I'm okay with tasks if I have a list. Like say I'm like, I've got work all day. Then I'm like, here's all the lists I need to do for work. Here's all the tasks I need to do for work. That's okay. But where I find it really tricky is on the weekends where I'm like, I've got all the time in the world, but not really any time. And I can't work out the spaces of how things are going to fit in. So it's usually like, for me, I'll just end up doing one thing in the day. Say it like, about, okay, I'm going to go see my sister at 2 p.m. All right. And then I don't really do anything until 2 p.m. and I don't plan anything afterwards, you know, or if I do have something planned afterwards, I'm like, okay. And then I've got to be, you know, over here by 8 o'clock. All right, how am I going to get there? How much time is that going to take? And I can end up, if I'm not conscious of it, I can end up sort of, I guess, becoming quite stressed and anxious about how I'm going to fit these things in my day, even if I don't have that much to do. So they're kind of some of the, I guess, main examples of overthinking. We're overthinking today. So the other thing, I guess, to kind of think about is, does everyone do this? I'm really curious about what people's experiences are here. I would say that from time to time, everyone can fall into these traps of thinking, of overthinking, but some of us have more of a tendency to do this than others, right? So for some of us, it can be very easy to fall into that pattern of thinking without us even necessarily trying to or becoming aware of it. And I think in the case of busy brains, it can definitely be something that's happening quite frequently. And that's, for instance, why we see things like ADHD, paralysis. So what can we do about that? How do we kind of move out of this way of thinking? I think one of the things that's really good to first think about is like, why does this actually happen in the first place? And there's probably a few different ways of answering that question, and it probably will depend on you and your own experiences. So let's say, for instance, with catastrophizing, thinking the worst thing that could happen. That could partly be if you have a tendency to get anxious, or if you have a comorbidity with an anxiety disorder. But the other thing that we could bring into it is looking at, things like past traumas. They could be, when we talk about trauma, sometimes we talk about like big T trauma and little T trauma. So trauma can come in lots of different shapes and forms. It could be something that is seemingly like, something relatively quote unquote small that has happened, but nonetheless, it has led to hurt, pain, injury of, I don't want to do that again. I don't want to go through this again. When we experience something bad that has happened to us, then we can think about how we can become hypervigilant. How do I avoid that happening in the future? So let's say, for instance, if you had a bad past relationship and then you're in a healthy relationship with someone else, but in that healthy relationship, something triggers you, something comes up that makes you feel like you're in that bad relationship you were in before, it reminds you of that, then the catastrophizing could be something like, oh no, that's going to happen again. I'm with exactly the same type of person. How do I end up with all these types of people? Like, this is a pattern. I know this pattern and I need to get out of it, And so we can end up thinking we need to break up with someone because maybe we had a fight with them and maybe it's completely fine and healthy, but we've ended up going down this path of thinking it's really, really, bad. I actually recommend, for me, I found this really helpful. If you're trying to understand why your overthinking is happening, have a chat with ChatGPT. Okay, I'm not saying it replaces therapists or coaches or anything like that, but I think especially if you're someone who has a busy brain and can find it hard to kind of process things inside your mind, that's definitely my case. I have a hard time actually working out what's going on when things are in my head. And so when I can say things out loud, I can start to see it for what it is. So I have been using the sound feature, the audio feature on ChatGPT, where I can just say the words and it says the words back to me. And I'll talk about something, like I'll say, I keep worrying about this, or I keep thinking about this. I think I might be catastrophizing. Why is that happening? Or I tend to overthink things or overanalyze things. What are the reasons that this could be happening? And it might give you some ideas of like, oh yeah, that kind of thing did happen in my past. That kind of thing I can relate to. Okay, how do I piece that together from here? Once we understand why that's happening, and this isn't the only way to do it. This is just my way of thinking about it, is I want to understand the why so then I can understand like what to do about it. Some people work the other way around, and some people don't even need a why, right? Like I learned this when I was going through my PT course. Not everyone wants to understand why it's, you need to eat a balanced diet. They just want to know how to eat a balanced diet or what to eat. Same with exercise, right? People don't necessarily want to know why they're doing the exercise. They just want to know what exercises to do. For me, I like to know the why. So we don't have to start there. That's just how I like to start. So how do we get out of it? What do we need to do? Again, I think this is partly coming down to, all right, what's going on? And maybe in this case, let's say we didn't understand the why. So I don't know why this happens. This is just something that happens in my brain. Okay, fine. What can we do about it? So one of the things that can be really, really useful is to, again, get this outside of your head so you can see it for what it is. Brene Brown talks about having like a shitty first draft. So essentially, she's like, when something's happening, you're telling yourself a story, write it down. Write down that shitty first draft. And it can look really, when we read it from our rational mind perspective, it might look really bizarre. Like, oh, wow, like I really thought that. Now, I'm going to tweak this a little bit because if you're anything like me, then you've probably bought like 10 journals and you've written 2 pages in each of them, and then you've given up on it because you didn't do it for a while and then you didn't want to use that notebook anymore. Maybe you're not like me, but that's what I do. So what I actually think is more helpful, and this is what I've been doing lately, is doing more like a mind map where I'm going, okay, what are all the things that are going on in my head right now as I'm thinking about this? I actually did this a lot for trying to figure out the stuff I was talking about last week around getting an ADHD diagnosis, trying to work out how to communicate what was going on for me, my experiences, how I was feeling about going to this appointment, all that kind of stuff. I mapped it all out, and I even, again, used AI to help me think about what questions I could ask myself. So say, for instance, if I'm going, am I catastrophizing? Okay, I'm just going to write everything down. I'm going to be able to see it. What's going on? Oh, I think this is happening. I think this is happening. I think my self-worth isn't good. I think this, whatever it is, I'm just going to like get it all out on the piece of paper, mind map it all. You can be as pretty or as ugly as you want with it. And then kind of going, now I can see it for what it is. And I can't remember what I was going to say. What was the other thing I was going to say? You can get ChatGPT to give you prompts. So say I said to ChatGPT, like, one of the things that I was trying to work out myself was like, do I have ADHD or do I have a combination of ADHD and ASD? Because I watched a lot of TikTok videos with people who were like ADHD, had autism and ADHD, and I could really relate to what a lot of things they were saying. And so that was kind of going round and round and round in my head. And then I was like, ChatGPT, like, how can you give me some questions to answer so I can start to understand this a little bit more for myself? And then I got those questions and then I mind mapped it all out. Really, really helpful. So I think, there's lots of things you can potentially do with overthinking, but I feel like getting things out on paper can be really helpful for busy brains. And it's something that I've talked to students about a lot as well, is like, okay, how do we get this out of your brain? Another tip I heard was, even if you have like a plush toy, like a teddy bear or something that you talk to, that can be helpful for processing things. One thing that I've found is that sometimes when I'm in a fight with someone, that's when it's the hardest for me to be able to like process what I'm feeling and thinking and trying to say. And I can end up miscommunicating a lot, and it just kind of escalates very quickly. And so 2 things that I've found really helpful for this is like, one, again, trying to step away and just process things. Because what I found I was doing is I was like talking to the person I was fighting with, trying to process what I needed to say to them, but I was saying everything out loud. So going away again, like be like, okay, ChatGPT, how do I write a letter to my mum about this thing? Or, whoever I'm, my partner or whoever, like I need to be able to try to write how I'm feeling in a way that I feel heard, and it needs to come out of my brain, and I can't get it out of my brain without, like, it's like the processing happens on the outside, if that makes sense. This is a podcast for busy brains, so I'm sure you can at least somewhat relate to this. Not saying that everyone's brain works the same as mine. As I mentioned last week, I only really know how my brain works, but hopefully this is sort of helpful to hear. The other thing that's been really helpful, and I just started doing this recently, is if I am having, like, it is healthy to have conflict, right? Like say with your partner, like you need to work things out and work through things. So what I've found helpful is actually getting a notebook, and in the fight, I know this sounds weird, but it works really well. In the fight, as my partner is trying to describe what's going on for her, I make notes on what she's saying. It helps me to witness her and what she's feeling, and it helps me not feel like I have to jump in and try to justify things, because my tendency when I'm in a fight is I'm like, if I don't say this right now, I will forget. So you've just told me, like, I can't hold on to 5 different things that you're telling me that you have a problem with, like you did this and then this happened and I felt bad and blah, because I'm like, that's too many things. There's way too many things. And when I'm upset or I feel threatened or I'm catastrophizing or I've got all this stuff going on in my head, it's like I actually can't really take any of that in. And that just meant that I ended up kind of falling into this trap of like having these really, really long fights and conversations, like that's just been a pattern in my life, is something that I kind of end up repeating myself over and over and over again, and the person I'm fighting with doesn't feel heard. So being able to kind of go, okay, hang on, let me just write down what you're saying. Okay, take a few breaths. Breathing I found really, really helps me with like when there's too many things going on. Let me take a breath. Okay, I'm just going to go back to the first point. There might be like 10 points on the page. I'm just going to go back to the first point. Okay, is this what you're saying? Yes, that's what you're saying. Okay, I can understand that. So you felt like this. Yes. Okay, all right. That's crap. I don't want you to feel like that. I'm really sorry about that. Okay, let's move on to the next point. And I can kind of work through the whole thing and I don't feel like all cluttered in my head. When I have that cluttering in my head, if it's not dealt with, it's sort of like then it just stays in my head bothering me, and it will come up at random times or it will come up in the next fight, and it's sort of like always there. The way I often describe how I think in my brain is it's not so much like I've got multiple people talking inside my head at the same time. It's more like there's sort of 2 main channels. There's like the main thought, and then there's always like some music in my head. That's the other channel. If I'm listening to music, then that kind of goes away. And then there's like these other layers of thinking, but I can kind of switch between them. So it's like main thought, other background thoughts, but then they can just pop up all of a sudden. I think like channel switching. And sometimes if there's lots of things going on at the same time, then I can't hear any of the channels. It's sort of like it's too busy, and then I just end up feeling really anxious and I can't tune into any one of them, I think. I don't know. It's always hard to tell how you think. I guess that's part of the overthinking. Oh, how long have we been going for? All right, we're coming up to 20 minutes. I want to try to make these podcast episodes around 20 minutes-ish each. So I'm really curious about, I guess how others are feeling about the overthinking, when it crops up, what tools you find useful. I'll be putting some of these clips up on TikTok and YouTube. So if you're watching this and you have some ideas that you want to share, please pop them in the comments. And next week we'll be talking about something also hopefully with a slightly funny title. Until then, I hope you feel like this is helping you live a more balanced-ish life. And I'll see you or chat to you again soon. Cheers.